Professor Leipziger. The debate about growth, is it a rich world's problem?
Not at all. I think we've often looked at it from the point of view of developing countries, because without economic growth, livelihoods don't improve, poverty is not reduced. So it's always been a problem for everyone. I think since the Great Recession of 2008-9, I think we're focusing on it more in the context of advanced economies, who we normally expected would grow, business cycles notwithstanding. They are now encountering difficulties. So I think it affects us all.
And questioning growth, is that a matter for developed countries, or is that also relevant in developing countries?
It's highly relevant in developing countries because they are affected by growth in the advanced economies because of trade and foreign direct investment, etc. They also suffer the volatility, as we see now, in not only commodity prices but also exchange rates and capital flows. So they're on the receiving end of a lot of instability, and so by all means it is something that they worry a great deal about.
Okay, so maybe allow me to ask a provocative question. You've dealt with the topic of growth all your life at the World Bank and now with Growth Dialogue. Aren't you fed up with the topic at some point?
Well, it's a good question. No, I'm not fed up because the challenges are changing. What we thought was we knew, we are less certain of in terms of some economic phenomena. And so the issue keeps changing. Just as an example, 2 weeks ago, the Growth Dialogue with the OECD organized a conference on disruptive technologies and its impact on growth, jobs, and inequality. Well, we weren't so worried about disruptive technologies for many decades, but now we are. So I think as the questions change, there's always room for intellectual inquiry and also for trying to give good policy advice.
Okay, so talking about changing questions, what's your feeling? To what extent did the growth discourse become more important or less important, more accepted, maybe also more realistic? What's your feeling on that?
Well, I think as we've seen in some of the sessions, growth it's not growth über alles. I mean, there are ways to look at the quality of growth, the distribution of growth, the measurement of growth. We have to worry about sustainability of growth. So I don't think we should lump all the discourse on growth into one concept. However, I think it has become more relevant today, and therefore the discourse more interesting and more important, because if you look at where the global economy is performing post-2010, so after the worst of the recession, for the last 5 years, we have seen a very weak recovery. We have seen countries, mostly in the advanced world, but also in the emerging markets, producing way below their potential, which means that something is not right. And so it's an issue that affects us all.
Okay, talking about something is not right, maybe one last question. As everybody talks about inclusive growth, but no one really comes up with the magic formula to implement it. What would you say would be concrete steps tomorrow to try to make global growth more inclusive?
Well, I think we have to be realistic that we're not going to do something at a global level. We have seen convergence between countries, but at the same time divergence of incomes within countries. So for me, I think we should look at it as a within-country phenomenon to begin with, although there's certain aspects globally that are unfair and should be dealt with, whether it's in the trade regime or in other areas. But within countries, no one is, I think, arguing for absolute equality. We're not talking about a global commune. We're talking about capitalism that has warts and needs to be fixed. The issue, I think, is one of economic opportunity. I don't think that outcomes, in terms of where you are in the income distribution, should be determined at birth. It should also not be determined by your gender. So that means that one has to provide a certain level playing field in terms of economic opportunity. Of course, certain people will work harder. Certain people will have better luck. I mean, not every app becomes Facebook, you know. So there are things you can't control. On the other hand, I think in terms of basic health, basic education, access to skills, I think people should be given a chance, given a shot. And so for me, inclusive starts with inputs rather than outputs. The distribution of income is an output. The question is, what are the equality or inequalities related to the inputs in terms of where people are and how much of their success is a function of their parents' position in the income distribution. And the OECD measures intergenerational income inequality. To what extent is it nature, and what extent is it nurture? You know, are you predetermined to do well, or can you break in to the system and do well, even though you weren't given the best opportunities? So I see public policy and the role of government as leveling the playing field and giving people an opportunity. That, to me, leads then to more inclusive societies.
Professor Leipziger, a very warm thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise. Thank you very much.